The business dinner is not the actual problem. What the day looks like around that dinner is the actual problem. That's something that every high-performing woman I work with has said before working with me. I do well all week, and then the business dinners ruin everything. Today, we're flipping that because I'll give you the exact frameworks my clients use to navigate business dinners, events, travel without destroying their progress. One of my clients, Rebecca, who is a team leader of a big team of a European organization, travels a lot and has a lot of client dinners with her team, also goes out for cocktails after these dinners. And what she did before working with me is she tended to restrict for breakfast and lunch to then make up for the higher calories that she had during dinner and also the cocktails that they had later on. Once she stopped with that pattern though, when we worked with each other, the urges to eat for dinner, her appetite decreased so much in a positive way that she craved way less and she could control her food intake. And within a matter of 2 months, she lost 6 kilograms while she was traveling. Just to show you that structure, and she wasn't even doing any strength training with me, so that was just the food. Just to show you how big the impact is of the structure throughout the day on the dinners, and we didn't even directly address the dinners, which is something we did then later on. So again, most women restrict all day before a dinner to save those calories, or maybe they didn't restrict before the dinner, but then they're restricting the next days to make up for the amount of calories that they had. They arrive starving at the next dinner, they overeat, they also drink more and they lose control, and they will also naturally crave more fatty foods. So subconsciously you will pick, if you're following that pattern, you will pick meals at the restaurant that will be less beneficial for you to lose body fat. Then you feel guilty, restrict again the next day, and the cycle just repeats. And that's this trap that most women that are facing a lot of business dinners are in. The dinner itself is not what caused the damage, but arriving in a fasted state or in a restricted state before that is the actual problem. One of the physiological backgrounds for that is the ghrelin response. So ghrelin, your hunger hormone, just increases when you're not eating or when you're eating little. At the same time, it blunts leptin, or it reduces the leptin levels, which is the satiety signal, or right, your hormone that signals that you had enough, so to say. That will automatically then lead to you, next to that drop in blood sugar in a lot of cases, choosing higher caloric meals for dinner. So that was the first insight. Now let's talk about what the day around the dinner should actually look like to facilitate that and make sure you can lose body fat without restricting yourself so much. Structure your day around the business dinner or business event. Eat normally during the day, don't restrict too much, which starts with proper protein and fat breakfast as well as lunch. Also have a small snack, 1 to 2 snacks throughout the day, in the AM or afternoon, especially before the dinner if you're hungry. Arrive in a more or less satisfied and definitely not in a starving way at the dinner, so that you can then eat like a normal human. The goal is also not to save room throughout the day so that you can eat as much as possible for dinner, but to show up in control, right? And that only works when you're arriving satisfied, more or less. You can still enjoy dinner, you can have a glass of wine or two, have the dessert, and you can still be in the deficit and the caloric deficit for the week if that's part of your current protocol. Now, one of the main reasons behind that is that having a proper protein and fat breakfast for as well as lunch stabilizes your blood sugar, and blood sugar control is so crucial because it affects decision making, right? Your blood sugar affects neurotransmitters, and then also affects hormones. And the more hungry you are because of a blood sugar roller coaster and because your blood sugar is dipping, the more you will crave for dinner and the less control you will have for dinner. So it's really, really crucial to eat in a way that facilitates a stable blood sugar. And as we know, the breakfast and lunch are the most important meals throughout the day when it comes to stabilizing your blood sugar, also for dinner. Under eating, but also eating in a way where you're having a lot of carbs throughout the day, if you don't need them, leads to what we call like this glucose instability, where your blood sugar just rises and drops. And that then impairs the decision making that I just mentioned, as well as your mental focus at work, which is of course also super crucial. Now let's talk about what to actually order at the dinner without being the person who makes it weird or brings their food scale to the table. You don't need a special order at the restaurant, you just need smart meal anchors. First anchor is protein, which is fish, seafood, or meat, like for example beef or chicken, whatever's on the menu. The second thing you always want to have is vegetables, or like a side salad if there's no vegetables in the dish. that you're picking. And carbs are also fine, which brings me to the first very common problem when you're eating out, which is that usually it's very heavy when it comes to fat, creamy, fried stuff, which we're getting to in a second. And the second thing is that it's usually also very carb heavy, which luckily, since most business food events are dinners, is totally fine, because carbs for dinner is what I recommend anyways, because afterwards you will wind down and you don't necessarily need the highest mental focus after dinner, but you can prepare your body for sleep. So carbs are totally fine, especially if the rest of the day was structured as mentioned before. That can be rice, that can be potato, that can be sweet potato, quinoa, gluten-free pasta, these kind of things. And what I would highly recommend, if you can choose, for example, Italian, there's a lot of examples, but for example, at the Italian place, they usually have salmon or another form of fish like sea bass with veggies, oven veggies or boiled veggies or steamed veggies with potatoes. Just one of the dishes that I like to recommend. What I do recommend is potatoes or sweet potatoes, because they are very high in volume, low in calories, and therefore also low in carbohydrates. So the ratio between how fast you'll feel filled up and satiated versus how much calories it has is a good ratio. You also don't have to explain yourself, you just order, you enjoy the food, and if you have a dessert here and there, also totally fine. The best thing with dessert is if you can find one that has lower fats, which means they will always have carbohydrates, because it's supposed to be sweet, so there will always mostly be sugar in there, but you would want to pick one that has at least not that much fat, if you can choose. Otherwise, just enjoy yourself and don't overthink it. Alcohol wise, 1 or 2 drinks I like to recommend as a maximum. With food is very different from drinking on an empty stomach. So with food, 2 glasses of white wine, totally fine. Ideally, of course, the 100 milliliter glasses, not the 200 milliliter ones, so that you have a rough framework. What's also interesting to know is, and that's why I mentioned protein as the first anchor, is that protein has the biggest thermic effect, especially compared to carbohydrates and fats, which means the more protein you're eating, the more your body needs to burn just by digesting those foods. So if you haven't heard of that, the thermic effect of food means how much of the calories you're consuming is is burned by just the digestion process itself. So that was the dinner itself. Now let's talk about the travel days, which are a completely different challenge. Now, the issue with travel days is that they are chaos, You have little time, you're at the airport, there is delays, and the food options available are just super bad. The mistake then is winging it and eating whatever is available, which is not the best options in most cases. The fix is a simple protein anchor with every single meal, everywhere. At the airport, that means specifically having something like a protein bar that you can easily bring or even buy at the airport, which usually wouldn't be the best option, but when you're traveling and you don't have other available options, that can be a great option. Or even bringing a handful of nuts, some dry beef jerky, the protein sachets as well, There's these 30-gram packages with protein powder inside that you get at the grocery store or drugstore. So these are super great options that you can just bring, or if it's available at the airport, even Greek yogurt, smoked salmon, boiled eggs, or something like that, depending on what kind of salad bars they have, of course. The next thing is when you arrive, like whatever is your destination, at the hotel buffet in the morning, the hotel breakfast, you want to stick with similar things like scrambled eggs, boiled eggs, dry meat if it's available, for example, or also smoked salmon or trout fillet, or even yogurt and mixing some protein powder inside, instead of the croissants and the sweetened yogurts and the whole bread and carbohydrate heavy things. That's what you want to stick with for breakfast. The structure definitely doesn't need to be perfect on travel days, and something interesting that I also come across a lot of times, actually thinking of a client right now that I've been working with for a year now. Before we've been working with each other, she told me that the travel days is the reason she couldn't make any progress. And she was traveling quite frequently. I would say on average like once a week, and she was on the road for like 2 days. But if we look at the number of meals that actually is, which is not insignificant, like being on the road in 2 out of 7 days on average throughout the month is for 8 out of 30 days, which is, let's say, 28-30% of times. theoretically, if she would be doing everything perfectly, besides those travel days, she still managed to do 72% like perfectly fine. And then it would just be the remaining 28%. So if we look at just how much that is specifically, and even if you mess something up, it doesn't affect you that much, right? If you're sticking with the rest and you're then also implementing the tips that I just mentioned on the travel days, chances are you're actually doing great. Because if, let's say, 1 or 2 out of 3 meals on those travel days are actually fine, like the hotel breakfast, and also the snack that you have for lunch or on the road, if these are fine and it's just the dinner that you're messing up, it's not that bad, right? It's not that bad. It's just like other people messing up the weekend. And if you're doing fine, besides those travel days, and you just stick with some of these anchors, you're going to be super fine overall. So try to make these travel days as structured as possible, and then also think about the big picture and how many days it really is. Like, of course, if you're traveling 5 out of 7 days, it's a different story, and then you would need to really make sure that the travel days also are working more or less fine. But so far, this is what I would really recommend. The physiological background behind why those travel days usually can actually be a problem is that just because of the traveling, the time zone differences, also the disrupted sleep, the fact that you're just in a new environment, these are all things that make your body more attentive physiologically, which means your cortisol is going to be increased, which disrupts sleep even more, next to a lot of times the lack of time that you have. And that chronic increase in cortisol, if you're doing that consistently, can then worsen insulin resistance, as in increasing insulin resistance, which of course is not the best scenario, like hormonally, to lose body fat, and can make it more difficult to lose body fat. So the most important point of the whole episode actually is the following: do not get emotional. No single dinner or no single travel day or work event will ever ruin your progress. The issue is doing something that is off the plan, eating a bit more, having 2 desserts, 3-4 glasses of wine, or even a cocktail at night, and then the next day restricting and forcing yourself to do very hard things like eating very little and punishing yourself for what you did wrong. That's the issue, because that will create this ripple effect of guilt, restricting yourself more, and then not progressing, because like you're just continuing with that. Of course, it's easier said than done, but sometimes, especially if also in business you're tracking KPIs and making numbers-based decisions, zoom out, look at what's actually happening, how many days we're actually off, how many days are you even traveling throughout the week, how often does this come up that you're actually off plan, and then remember when you did something that was not fine and that hurt your progress, so to say. The next morning, eat normally. Don't eat less, especially that next morning if you had a lot at night, because then the ripple effect starts. Eating less in the morning is never ever the solution, okay? Please remember this, because your metabolism especially is more active throughout the day, so what's happening at night is the biggest issue, but then restricting in the morning is the worst place to restrict your food, and that overall that pattern of guilt and restriction is what a lot of women that are working with me are finally breaking, because, right, with the guidance that I give them, I tell them, hey, it's not about eating less, it's about more of the right things, right? In a nutshell, of course, like super simplifying that a lot right now, but that's the most common issue. This psychological response to what you could call perceived overeating, when you feel like you were off at night, that's what leads to this effect where you're like restricting, binging, and so on, and that causes more of that caloric surplus. If we just looked at the numbers and at how much you're eating, how much calories you're eating, more caloric surplus than just overeating at night and then continuing like normal. So that's just something that you need to remember. I would like to sum this up because we talked about a lot. Number 1, eat normally during the day. That's super important. Don't restrict before dinner, because otherwise this will backfire. Rule number 2, protein anchor with every meal that you order, which means when you're traveling with the snacks that we mentioned, but also for dinner and the events, all of it, always implement the protein anchor. And rule number 3, which was the last point, is that the next meal after a big dinner is always normal. It's never restricting and then binging and then ending up in the cycle, but just continuing as if nothing happened. Okay, so if you found any of this helpful, would mean the world to me, as per usual, if you scrolled up, subscribe to the episode, send this to a friend who needs it, and I'm looking forward to the next one.